Japan's 3,000 or more islands stretch from the Okhotsk Sea, which laps against Russia, nearly 3,000 kilometers southwest towards Taiwan, to the semi-tropical Ryukyu Islands. This range in latitude, together with volcanic activity caused by the friction between two great continental plates, has created a wonderful variety of habitats, home to 130 mammal and over 500 bird species. In the traditional attitude to the natural world, man is not above, but at one with wildlife. Natural beauty, anything which evoked admiration, whether a living creature or a group of rocks, had its own kami or spirit. The people had a special sympathy for nature. Flowers and animals seemed to reflect their feelings, and many wild creatures became religious or artistic symbols. For many, the powerful symmetry of FUJISAN represented the beauty of Japan herself. But today, visitors can drive 2/3 of the way up to pay homage to this powerful symbol. Under such pressure, her beauty lies tarnished. If this can happen to FUJISAN, how much room can the people give their wildlife? The mountains which stretch down the length of Japan were once mysterious, remote, and impenetrable. They were revered by the native religion, Shinto, as the home of the highest earthly kami, or spirits. The monkey became the messenger of the Shinto gods. Legend says that monkeys helped carry the timber to build this shrine on Mount Hiei near Kyoto, where the monkey is still sacred. The monkey messengers communicated between the Shinto priests and the mountain spirits. One story tells how when the priests went into the remote forest to speak with the kami, the wild monkeys emerged. So the priests believed they'd come to listen to their prayers. Kami dwelt in beautiful trees, stones, or running water. When priests placed offerings at these spots, the wild monkeys were again sent to collect them. "90% of Japan was forested when the macaque first arrived, many thousands of years before the Japanese people. The macaque colonized most of the islands from as far south as the first subtropical island to the northern tip of Honshu. At some time in prehistory, the Japanese macaque, a unique species, evolved. Japanese macaques, found further north than any other primates except man, are known as the snow monkeys. They're social animals living in troops of 15 to 200 or more. The social structure is well organized. The male with the strongest character presides over a strict hierarchy. Macaques once lived in the lowland forests. Before these were felled around 300 BC to make way for rice cultivation. Japan is short of flat land, and soon the hills were terraced, pushing the forest wildlife into the mountains. Conflicts began as man and monkey competed for food. There were many early superstitions and folk tales about monkeys. In some they were wicked or cunning, but in others they had healing powers. Witch doctors travelled with tame monkeys to reinforce the patient's belief in their skills. From the earliest times we meet a dichotomy which appears to plague the perception of the monkey. Sometimes the monkey's good, other times it's an evil omen. The macaques are primarily herbivorous, and in the northern deciduous forests their diet changes with the seasons. In early spring the macaques follow the receding snow, eating buds and shoots up the mountainside. Each morning the troop travels in search of food, staying within a home range of between 5 and 20 square kilometers. Vocal communication helps keep neighboring troops apart from each other, and fights between them are rare. The Japanese sero is also unique to Japan. Like the macaque, the sero once found its living in the lowland forests. The sero is generally solitary, but a single calf, born in spring, will probably stay with its mother until it's 2. The seros browse as they slowly move up to the open alpine grazing. Another mammal which shares the forest habitat is the Asiatic black bear. The mark on its chest has earned it the name crescent moon bear. The bears emerge from their dens in spring. The black bear and the sero never attained the religious status of the monkey. Other creatures, however, had great significance. In these remote mountains, the howling wolves communicated the wishes of the deities. Today, only their statues remain. The wolf is now extinct. In the lowlands, living around the rice paddies, the fox became the messenger of the rice kami. Fox shrines are still extremely popular, because when the farmers left the land and became businessmen, they kept the fox as their messenger. The early believers had no need to build shrines. They simply worshipped natural beauty. A spot became sacred because it evoked feelings of wonder and awe. Later, as Shinto became more sophisticated, gates or tori were built to separate the spiritual world from the ordinary, and little wooden shrines housed the kami. Tall trees were revered by Shinto. Like mountains, they were stepping stones by which the deities could come to earth. A rope of plaited rice straw decorated with strips of bleached mulberry bark indicated spiritual power. Messengers were folded into shapes to charm the gods into reading them. People still buy paper fortunes at shrines, and they leave the bad or unlucky prophecies in the care of the trees. The macaque and hundreds of other lowland forest species benefited from the worship of the trees. Protected by the presence of kami, the shrine forests were wildlife sanctuaries. In the traditional view, man was simply one of the participants in the natural world. This may explain why the people feel they have a special ability to sympathize with or transfer their own feelings to animals such as the monkey. Another legacy of Shinto which remains embedded in the Japanese consciousness is a love for the changing seasons. Radio bulletins detail the progress of the cherry blossom as it moves in a tide up the country. By early April, the cherries are blossoming in Hiroshima. Their arrival has been celebrated since an imperial decree in the 8th century. They still herald the beginning of the school year and the movement of employees to new postings. It is May, when the mountain cherry blossom flowers in the northern forests, and the young are born to the females during the night. The baby will grow up in the protective care of the troop, where it will become the center of attention. The mother will be groomed by her siblings and older daughters as they attempt to catch a glimpse of the baby or a chance to hold it. In the 8th century, the monkey messengers of Mount Hiei were granted a new role, the protection of the emperor from evil. When the imperial capital was moved to Kyoto, Mount Hiei lay in the direction from which bad influences were believed to come. The Japanese like to play on words, and the written character for go away, saru, is pronounced in the same way as the character for monkey. So the monkeys became symbolic for driving away evil. And along the route from the palace to Hiei, carved monkeys protect the shrines from evil. In the same period, Buddhism came to Hiei. A priest who had been born on Hiei returned from China a monk with new ideas. and built this temple at the top of the mountain. Before building the temple, the monks prayed to the kami for permission to fell the trees. Thus, the home of the sacred monkeys, high in the mountains, was one of the first mixing grounds for Buddhism and Shinto. By summer, the baby macaques are beginning to leave their mothers' backs. While the rest of the troop is feeding, much of the youngsters' time is spent in play. They'll stay close to their mothers until they're 10 months or more, learning, for instance, to tell the ripe from the sour cherries, picking up the skills they need for independence. As the sacred monkeys were common in the hills around Kyoto, it's not surprising that the Buddhists chose monkeys to publicize some of their ideas. About a century after Buddhism came to Hiei, a monk came down to this temple in Kyoto. Legend says he wrote a poem known as the Monkey Poem, because by playing with words and images, he used monkeys to help explain its meaning. The monkey poem teaches that one should avoid bad influences, do not look at evil, or see no evil, hear no evil, and speak no evil. These are the original wise monkeys, according to legend. The real origin of the three wise monkeys is shrouded in ancient mystery. But no country other than Japan reveals such widespread popularity of the image between the 14th and the 19th centuries. In Japan today, the three monkeys are linked with an obscure sect which originated in China named Koshin. Followers believed that three evil worms lived in the human body, and on a certain night, known as Monkey Night, they escaped to report bad behavior to a heavenly being. The only way to prevent the worms was to stay up all night. In the 10th century, Koshin nights were popular among aristocrats, and by the 15th century, the practice had become widespread. Sometime around this latter period, the more cheerful image of the three wise monkeys may have been adopted as an antidote to the terrible three evil worms. Koshin persisted as a folk belief in rural areas, and Koshin stones with carved monkey images can still be found scattered over the countryside. This belief is responsible for spreading the three wise monkeys all over Japan. In this remote southern peninsula, Koshin stones, with their vantage point over the rice paddies, are still visited by a few faithful. For rural and city people alike, the gradual turning of the maple leaf to its final deep blood red is still symbolic of autumn. In autumn, the female macaques come into estrus. It's an important season for reassertions of social position. From the age of 3, juvenile males begin to leave. They may spend a number of years as loners before becoming accepted by another troop. In this way, incest is avoided, and the troop's stability is maintained by matrilineal ties. As the leaves die, the macaques turn to new forage. Chestnuts, fungi, fruit and berries become the staple diet of the troop. It also becomes harder for the Japanese sero to find green browse. In autumn, mother and calf gradually make their way down to the valleys. In October, Suzuki, one of the 7 grasses of autumn, flowers, a signal for people to flock to national parks such as Nikko for autumn color viewing. Most of the tourists visiting Nikko will stop at the famous Toshogu shrine. Horses are traditional gifts to shrines, and because a monkey was once believed to have cured an emperor's horse, monkeys were often placed with livestock to protect them. Above the stable at Nikko is the most famous carving of the 3 wise monkeys in Japan, if not the world. Toshogu was built in the 17th century in honor of a great shogun. Craftsmen from Kyoto and monks and priests from Mount Hiei traveled to Nikko to help set up the shrine, bringing with them the image of the wise monkeys. Tourists of all nationalities come to observe the carvings which reveal a panorama of the life cycle of monkeys, which have Buddhist and Confucian interpretations about how one should and should not behave. In 1868, Japan reopened her doors to foreigners, and it may well have been from this stable at Nikko that the 3 wise monkey image spread to the modern world. By late autumn in the north, snow has fallen on the mountain summits. The nuts and fungi have been finished, and the macaques travel down the mountains in search of food. As they come lower into a land which was once theirs, each year they encounter more humans. Japan's post-war prosperity has brought more roads and more people into the national parks. Many appear to function simply to provide recreational facilities for a people short of land. The reverence seems all but lost for mountains like this one, once highly sacred to both Shinto and Buddhism. And if the mountains are no longer sacred, then the people no longer need their monkey messengers. But the loss of habitat has a more direct effect on the macaque troops. Rice paddies have to be flat to hold water, and when they terraced the hills, the people first learned that landscapes could be altered. Naturalists blame the quarrying of a mountain within the home range of a macaque troop for bringing them down to raid the crops. The problem is at its most acute in winter. 40% of Japan's forest is now commercially planted, most of it within the winter range of forest wildlife. Naturalists estimate that only 5% of the original northern beechwoods remain. The forestry industry is struggling against competition from cheaper imports, and in an effort to keep it going, clear felling of native woods and planting with conifers continues. In winter, the macaques gnaw the bark from deciduous trees. Their commercial plantations have little to offer, although occasionally they will try to find nourishment in a conifer. But to foresters, the pests are the black bears, which strip the bark, and the Japanese serows, which feed on the shoots of young conifer plants. The serow, traditionally hunted for its meat and fur, has been protected since 1955. Foresters say there are now too many, and since 1979, the government has issued licenses for around 1,000 serows a year to be shot. But this hasn't satisfied some foresters. The government now plans to allow shooting anywhere outside certain protected areas and the commercial sale of the fur. Conservationists say that most sanctuaries are too high and in winter the seros will be forced down to become targets for both foresters and commercial hunters. In Hokkaido, Japan's far northern island, the large mammals fare little better. A biological divide separates Hokkaido from the rest of Japan, and many species are more closely related to Siberian fauna. Hokkaido has no black bears, but the forest and mountains are colonized by brown bears. Mother and cub have a last romp before retiring to hibernate over winter. The brown bear, related to the North American grizzlies, has a ferocious and, according to naturalists, over-exaggerated reputation for killing people and livestock. But for the Ainu people, the original inhabitants of Hokkaido, wild animals were gods bearing gifts. The bear was one of the highest gods. Lord of the mountains, he could send deer or salmon to feed them, and he gave his coat for warmth, his meat for food, and his gallbladder for medicine. The Ainu chanted as they celebrated the bear festival before each hunting season to warn the gods that they were about to return a bear spirit to the god world. A bear was reared in the village from a small cub. It was the children's playmate until it grew too large while awaiting the day of the festival. Filmed in 1977, this was one of the last festivals in which a bear was returned to the god world in this manner. The idea was to feast and entertain the bear god. Then he would return to the god world with good memories of the Ainu village and recommend that others come to visit the people. At dawn, the bear was anointed and a symbolic arrow fired to help the spirit back to the god world. With a bounty on their heads, bears now die in greater numbers, not as gods, but as pests. By returning animals to the god world, the Ainu practiced a kind of spiritual game management. In the long term, their lifestyle must have been better for wildlife than agriculture, which simply displaces nature. In the late 19th century, Japanese pioneers, tired of the tiny fields on the main islands, came to farm the vast open spaces of Hokkaido. Today, its land is as heavily utilized as the rest of Japan's. The people are renowned for their traditional reverence for nature. Yet, at the same time, they have a poor reputation for looking after their wildlife and habitats. This paradox may partly be explained by the fact that farmers, struggling to grow food, always had to clear forests and keep out wildlife which stole or trampled their crops. In the early years of the empire, only the aristocrats had time to develop an aesthetic appreciation of nature. Aristocrats, scholars, and priests spent many hours contemplating the gentle beauty of nature. It provided the inspiration needed to express their thoughts. They also shaped the raw materials of nature to reflect their ideas or to create a tranquil atmosphere. These gardeners are clearing the algae from each stone. Just as monks wanted to remove clutter from their minds, so the unwanted debris of nature is removed. Many bonsai, miniature trees, are over 100 years old. They've been pampered, pruned, and disciplined to grow into the required form. A living plant is shaped to enhance the spiritual contemplation of the human mind. But in the cultured havens of the court, the aristocrats were sheltered from the reality of raw nature. Some Japanese say that because the people have always been part of the natural world, they feel no responsibility towards it. They've had to cope with the ravages of earthquakes and volcanoes. Why should nature not now adapt to the changes wrought by man? In their experience, nature was always rich and bountiful. Plants that were cut down reappeared the following season, and animals quickly recolonized devastated land. Others point out that Japan's environmental problems arrived with Western industrialization. They say that whereas Christian man always believed he was above and dominant over nature, the Japanese thought they, their trees, and even their buildings were simply part of it. Some emphasize that the Western conservation attitude has only recently developed. Give Japan time, they say, and her people will soon realize they are losing something precious. It's been said that there is more dilemma in the Japanese attitude to the monkey than to any other creature because of the similarities between macaque and man. Yet some Japanese people choose to use their special empathy with the monkey. When, in 1952, scientists began to feed the macaques on Koshima Island off Kyushu to encourage them out into the open, they discovered something which brought the divide between humans and animals closer. The primatologists buried wheat grains in the sand to give them a chance to get close to individuals. At a time when Western scientists were studiously objective and analytical for fear of being called anthropomorphic, the Japanese were giving names to the macaques and concentrating on their individual characters. One such character was Imo. In 1953, she found that if she threw the wheat and sand mixture into the water, the wheat grains floated and she could easily scoop them up. In time, her siblings and children copied the behavior and spread it to their contemporaries. Gradually, this way of feeding became common amongst the troop. This discovery astounded international anthropologists because for the first time, the beginning and the spread of cultural behavior had been recorded in a non-human society. The macaques at Koshima were also fed sweet potatoes. The same resourceful individual discovered that if she took them to water, she could rub the mud off. This behavior also spread to her kin. Today, the macaques are fed clean, pre-packed potatoes, yet they still dunk them in the sea, possibly, according to some scientists, because they like salt on their potatoes. These discoveries were made by people who had not placed themselves above wildlife in the first place. When criticized for their approach, they replied that to ignore personality was to ignore the treasure. They say this attempt to see life from the monkey's point of view came naturally to them as Japanese. But once people realized macaques would accept food, the barriers were broken. Monkeys became a commercial proposition, and monkey parks opened all over Japan. Most city people's first encounter with a wild macaque is within one of Japan's 30 or so monkey parks. The macaques increased in number because of the new food supply, but they became dependent on it. These monkeys were no longer earning respect. In the 60s, soon after the mercury pollution scare, a disturbing phenomenon occurred in the monkey parks. Monkeys were born with frightening deformities after their parents had been fed contaminated fruit. Visitors to the park, especially young mothers fearing for their own children, were able, in the Japanese way, to imagine themselves in the monkey's position, and the empathy between humans and monkeys reached a peak. Pesticides were controlled and the scare evaporated. But the provisioned food has given new confidence to macaques. Whether taking food from the monkey parks or from tourists or raiding crops, the mammal the people have never quite come to terms with is definitely amongst them to stay. Even up in the remote mountains, there are now few troops which do not come into contact with man. In the northern highlands, some troops cannot escape the snow. At night, when the temperatures plummet, the macaques will make sleeping nests and huddle together in the trees. These particular snow monkeys belong to one of the most popular macaque troops. They're regularly fed 3 times a day. Tourists from the nearby ski resort come to witness this event and the resourceful behavior which has given these macaques worldwide fame. Foreigners watching will often exclaim that the shock of emerging from the hot spring bath into the freezing temperatures must ruin any pleasure. But Japanese people know that the warmth will stay with the macaques for many hours. In the heart of Tokyo, the showman's monkey, taught to sit like a human, still attracts a crowd. Dating back to the time when witch doctors traveled with monkeys, the performances were later patronized by samurai. And in accordance with their lifestyle, the emphasis is on discipline. The monkey must obey. The trainer says that it is by treating the monkey as a human and constant companion that he is able to teach it to behave like a human. Strict etiquette and the importance of good behavior have a long tradition with the Japanese. Some young people say that for them, this is what the three wise monkeys epitomize. People have shown that they are prepared to sacrifice their personal ideals for the good of the group or country. After the war, they strove hard to rebuild Japan. It was not the time to create a fuss about negative things like the loss of so much natural beauty. For many, despite personal misgivings, it was more important to turn a blind eye to maintain the social order and harmony. The huge surge to the cities is only 30 years old. Today, people from all walks of life are questioning what is happening to the landscape. They realize that their traditional reverence for wildlife evolved when nature could replenish itself in the cycle of the seasons, and that now, against the progressive onslaught of industrialization and consumerism, nature has little chance. Some of the younger generation are most active in the small conservation movement which seeks to promote a new attitude to the environment and instigate laws which are favorable to wildlife. This group was formed with the specific aim of protecting the Japanese sero. Volunteers place nets over the shoots of young cypress trees in an attempt to protect them. On each visit, they take detailed measurements so they can calculate the extent of any damage. They also make an effort to discuss the problem with foresters. Their work is generally welcomed, but granting the sero complete protection is another matter. They face a hard task and say the situation will not improve until more people decide whether in the modern world Japan's wildlife has any value. The Japanese macaque, the mammal most easily observed in the wild, may help more people to make the choice. At this monkey park, on the outskirts of Kyoto, if visitors want to feed the macaques, they have to do so from inside a cage. Most visitors appreciate the irony. And in this park, away from the feeding cage, the macaques do not harass the tourists. Some local primary school children have formed a friendship group. They're friends of the macaques. They know all the individuals by name and their relationships with other members. They have a strong respect for the character and personality of each macaque. In 1983, a new cultural behavior was discovered in this troop. It was called stone playing, and primatologists found it difficult to explain in scientific terms of direct benefit or adaptive value. They came to the conclusion that the macaques play with stones simply because, like people all over the world, they sometimes feel like play.